We are presenting today is largely the methodological side of an evaluation we've been working on. This is of SEWA's Women's Enterprise Support System. Both the project and the evaluation have been supported, financed by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. This involves both the SEWA Cooperative Federation and SEWA Bharat, and our evaluation partner is ID Insight. We've been working together on this project. Let's move forward. A bit of background. Probably most people here know about SEWA, but I want to just, for those, especially any international participants, to say a few words about this. So let's go forward, Sedan. By way of background, of women working outside the home in India, some 90% are part of India's informal economy. Of course, SEWA was founded by Elaben Bhatt as a trade union several decades ago with the goal of providing representation and support for informal sector workers. And they now have some 2.9 million workers, ranging from all kinds, from artisans, street vendors, farm workers. Soon after the foundation, SEWA made a decision to form collective social enterprises of their members as a further development of their work, both to provide incomes and livelihood and to extend the agency of their members. And having said that, what we all know globally and will hear is that women's collective enterprises face the normal problems of any small-scale enterprise, the challenges of collectives, but they also tend to face higher problems, especially greater problems because of working within a patriarchal society where many of the networks and patterns and expectations are still very male-dominated. For that reason, about 4 to 5 years ago, SEWA formed the Women's Enterprise Support System with the goal of helping the enterprises become sustainable, both financially and in broad terms, as a means of empowering the women's members. That's the context that we're working with. Now, this project, our evaluation, let's move forward, Siddhant. Our goal as evaluators was to assess the impact of the Women's Enterprise Support System, both on sustainability of SEWA's enterprises and the consequences for women. Now, as we approach this as evaluator, the first thing to be aware of is that this is a highly complex topic in a good way. And this is in many dimensions. First, the West has many interventions that it has designed, has been exploring, has been evolving to support its enterprises. You see it on the list on the left. These range from branding, digital marketing, all the way through to mentorship, human resource development, and business development, because that is the nature of the challenges faced by an enterprise. SEWA has some 140 social enterprises, women's collective enterprises that it works with. They selected 8 enterprises basically to develop the prototypes of what could effectively tackle the problems, support them as businesses. And we see on the right that there are 3 enterprises in the SEWA's Co-op Federation that is based in Gujarat, and 5 that they focused on in SEWA Bharat. And these range from health, agriculture, finance, artisan domestic work. Now, this analytically for an evaluator is highly complex, not only because of the numbers that we're looking at here, but also because we're looking at multiple interactions, we're looking at organizational histories, and we're looking at how both the individual, the leaders are interacting within the market. And that is why, and this is very much a theme of this session, that is why a conventional large-end statistical analysis, whether it's an RCT or another, much as they are very appropriate for many topics, but these were not appropriate for this kind of evaluation challenge. And that is why we wanted to present today both how we did it and some selected results on this. Let's move forward. So what we're going to do now is Siddhant is going to present some of the key principles of the evaluation, and then we'll pass over to Siddharth on just to share two of the examples. Over to you, Siddharth.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Michael. So I wanted to quickly step back and just introduce adaptive evaluation. And the first thing about adaptive evaluation is we tried to base it in a lot of complexity thinking and system-based thinking. And its application we see directly linked to innovation and scaling and development. And so broadly, adaptive evaluation uses three main approaches. The first is system-based approaches, and typically this is the very first step in an adaptive evaluation. We see this crucial because any innovation already exists within a system and has a history, but also any scaling of an innovation typically involves moving an innovation from one context, organization, or geography to typically another context, which inevitably involves navigating systems. And so typically what we do here is a participatory workshop with key stakeholders. Um, we look at leverage points, levers for change. We look at blockages, the reciprocal actions between actors. And this is the first step in deriving a theory of change, which is trying to unpack the black box between the intervention and the outcome. And we like to use systems mapping and systems diagnostics to come up with this theory of change because it's grounded in the system's work. And so here we have, examples in the image of Fishbone, Ishikawa, and Logic Frame. So you can use any of these, but this is typically, we take this further by testing the theory of change with evidence as it unfolds to find out whether the causal mechanism is present and also if which parts of the causal mechanism are working and or not. And the third piece is on iterative approaches. This is the piece where we take the learnings from the theory testing into intervention design in an iterative manner. So to inform the learning throughout and also continually update the systems, our systems analysis and our theories of change. And so that's broadly at a theoretical level, the three steps of an adaptive evaluation. Practically, in terms of process, what we typically start with is a literature review. And so in Move, in this project on the enterprise support system, we did a literature review on understanding globally cooperatives, accelerators, and women's agency, and of course how it relates in India. We then do a system mapping, and so the system diagnostic at the organization level is the tool we use for that is called the flame. And so we did a flame analysis for each of the social enterprises. It typically involves looking at the identity of the organization, the tone, the structure, and the actions, and if there's alignment between identity and structure. Um, the last pieces involve building a theory of change from the systems diagnostic. And both of these we try to do this in a very participatory manner with the implementation team throughout. And from the theory of change, we start a sequence of testing the theory of change. And here we use a particular technique, process tracing. And so what we have done in this project is process tracing of specific cases, uh, which typically involves one WES module applied to a particular enterprise. And process tracing essentially tries to understand whether each causal step is working or not uh, based on evidence as it unfolds. And so in that sense, it's iterative. Um, and so from there, we try to prototype aspects that could improve from brainstorming along with it, and this is closely with the intervention partners. And then, as I said earlier, revise and reassess our initial theory of change and understanding of the system. And so, just in the spirit of illustrating a system map, here is one of SEWA. Uh, the goal of a system map when we start is to list the main actors and also the reciprocal actions between them. So uh, this system map has many levels. It starts with SEWA, which is the institution we're working with. Within SEWA, there are two women's enterprise support systems, the SEWA Federation and the SEWA Bharat. Both have their women's enterprise support system, and they get from SEWA institutional support, funding, and also the strong grounding in Gandhian and collective values. And then the WESs, in turn, provide services, modules, technical support, and this business orientation to SEWA's 140 social enterprises, 8 of which are covered by this project. And from the enterprises, hopefully the women members, of which there are many, get livelihoods, opportunities, and for agency and empowerment. And this is in one direction. There's, of course, a parallel direction moving from women members to the women's enterprise support system. But this is our sort of boundary in the system. But of course, outside the system, there are government programs and women empowerment, such as the NRLM. There's external incubators. There's competitors for each of these enterprises, uh, with respect to their sectors and geography. And of course, there's other women's groups involved as well. And so our evaluation actually goes into 3 levels: the women's enterprise support system, the social enterprise level, and the women's members. And today, what we're largely going to illustrate is this piece on social enterprises, specifically process tracing of modules as they apply to a particular enterprise. And from there, I think what I just described was essentially a high-level theory of change where the women's enterprise support system provides modules to social enterprises with the hope that they improve capacities in a specific function depending on the module. And that improves financial performance, sustainability of the enterprise, and eventually increases their income and increases women's income and empowerment. A quick note here is that we can assess the first part of the theory of change well, and a lot of the process tracing work is in the first 2 steps to understand whether the WES modules help improve the social enterprise's capacity. We do track member level incomes and empowerment, but these are not, as tightly attributed to the initial part of the theory of change. Good. So now we transition to moving to some examples of our work. And these are just illustrations. Of course, the details, as Michael said, will be shared um, publicly on our website and otherwise. But I wanted to give a quick sense of the methodology. And so me and my colleague Siddharth will present this. And so just to recap, as I said, this process tracing is really about unpacking the first 2 steps of the theory of change. How do WES services to social enterprises help improve their capacities in a specific function? What is the causal mechanism between this? And we present 2 cases today. So the first is uh, a module offered by the Seva Bharat WES on business development to Karn Bhumi, which is one of Seva's social enterprises. And the second is a case of agile support, which the Seva Fed provided to Lok Swasthya Mandali or LSM. And so I'll get us started on the first case, uh, which was of business development support to Karn Bhumi. Um, and so just a quick intro on Karn Bhumi for context. So Karn Bhumi works in the agriculture sector. It's based in Bihar, founded in 2018. It's a farmer producer organization. And essentially what it does is 2 things. It sells high quality farm inputs. It also works on output marketing, which is purchasing harvest and then selling it uh, at aggregating and selling it. And the idea is that it began really as a response for fairer returns on harvest. The goal was to connect farmers to the market for better earning, and the business involves procuring and selling larger volumes of harvest to benefit more farmers and eventually, in turn, generate higher revenues. And so the main intervention by Wes in their business development support for the output marketing business was to facilitate Karnbhumi's interaction with a technical expert for pre-planning, because a lot of demand mapping, setting prices needs to be done prior to this process. Also assist in raising working capital, because this requires large amounts of cash flow to buy and sell in a timely manner, and support in the process of actually buying and selling, so the procurement. And so the key question from process tracing we were trying to understand is, what is the confidence level that Wes's support to Karnbhumi for their output marketing service contributed to higher quantities of higher volumes of harvest sold, and in turn increased revenue. And so here we have is what we have here is a theory of change, trying to understand what is in between Wes's intervention and the outcome of of that intervention improving Wes's capacities. So this was built in collaboration with ID Insight. ID Insight ran and supported us in this process tracing and have been our evaluation partner throughout. This was done in a very participatory manner. So ID Insight went to the women's, worked with Karnbhumi to truly understand what was, the mechanism between the intervention and outcome. And very quickly, broadly, it involves some pre-planning work, as I said, demand mapping to set procurement targets and prices. There's a step on working capital, so estimating the requirements, but also applying for the loan, and Wes helped in these aspects. There's a part of purchasing moisture meters to understand the quality of output, which was facilitated by Wes experts. Of course, Wes had to create sales and purchase registers and a series of steps to make sure the right buyers are identified, the standard operating procedures for procurement and storage are done. And eventually, hopefully, this leads to Karnbhumi being able to sell more than the previous cycle, thus increasing revenue. But what I'm going to illustrate here is try to peel the onion and reveal what we do to typically test a theory of change. And so there are two elements. The first is we look at the evidence and we try to infer from the evidence the degree to which it can affirm or negate a causal step. And so that's one element. And the second element is the source, where we try to understand whether the data or the evidence is reliable, unbiased, representative. And from those two, we form a verdict, which is a level of confidence on each step. And so to illustrate, uh, here's one example where the first step on pre-planning work, we found evidence that, that West provided guidance on this and that the demand mapping was indeed carried out. So we have high confidence that this affirms this causal step. And that confidence is largely based on interviews with Karnbhumi stakeholders. We saw the demand mapping table, the price analysis table. We saw a buyer's list, all of which was, we think, very reliable data. And so the combination of strength of logic and strength of evidence led to the verdict that we're fairly confident that this causal step works. And we sort of did this for each step. And what this eventually does is it leads to an understanding of whether the entire causal mechanism is present or absent. And so from this exercise, we really felt that there's high confidence that this causal mechanism for business development support is present, and that the West did help Karnbhumi in its output marketing service. From here, I'm going to pass to Siddharth, my colleague in India, who also went ahead and did a follow-up of Karnbhumi. So Siddharth, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Siddharth, for introducing our work with Karnbhumi. Now, I'll be talking about the two assessments that we made on these paddy procurement cycle based on the snapshots that are shared on the deck. In the first case, we were highly confident that West has the intervention that was provided by West to the enterprise has been able to enhance business outcomes for the enterprise. These business outcomes include, first of all, setting up the output marketing business itself, and also help them achieve their volume-based targets. Now, however, the enterprise was not able to make profit in this transaction one of the reasons for that was they were not able to enable the mechanism of dynamic pricing while they were procuring uh, from the farmers. Additionally, there was some scope of improvement on the side of standard operating procedures as well, which included maybe a better use of moisture meters as well as updation of sales and purchase registers on a regular basis. Now, this feedback was presented to the enterprise management as well as to the West, and they undertook an exercise of better planning for the next paddy procurement cycle. This cycle happened in December 23 to Jan 24, which we again went on to process trace. In this particular case, we were able to again be highly confident of the fact that the intervention provided by West has been improving the business outcomes. And on another level, the enterprise was able to make profits in this transaction. Again, the major factor that has contributed to is the implementation of the dynamic pricing strategy employed by the enterprise. We also saw that the enterprise was able to achieve their volume-based targets as well as work better on their for proper follow-up on the standard operating procedures, which included usage of correct weighing machines, usage of better usage of moisture meters and readings being carefully taken and documented, plus regular well updation of sales and purchase register, which also included the timely payments that were made on to the farmers through a net banking channel. Now, something that remains as like the next set of business opportunities, which would be evaluated through again process tracing cases, would be the fact whether by using experience of this particular experiment, would Karnbhumi be able to procure at a higher level so that they can provide even better margins to their farmers? As well, whether this case of like working closely on the output marketing channel can help them do better customer acquisition for the input business as well. We can move to the next case. This is the case of agile support being provided to Lok Swasthya Mandali. Lok Swasthya Mandali is one of the earliest floated social enterprises by SEWA. This primarily deals in Ayurvedic health, cosmetic products, and services. Now, the interaction that started from Imago's side with LSM led into LSM deciding in a workshop setting that they should be focusing more on developing their capacity of their staff and members. When the discussion was more focused in some later meetings, we thought LSM decided that this point of capacity building should focus on improving the commission agent-based channel. Why? Because this commission agent-based channel can provide the maximum amount of impact as it can employ a lot more number of people into the business, as well as also contribute much more to the revenue side of the enterprise. This was followed by year-long agile experiments while working closely with the enterprise. And then the key question that emerges is whether this agile-based experiment was able to achieve its stated objectives. Uh, Moving on to the next part. So this is depicts our whole set of interventions that were undertook during this agile process. First, we started with identifying and explaining the problem. We started with agile sprints, which would be like 15 minutes call happening thrice in a week with the LSM management and Imago members on the other side. We would work closely in identifying the correct problem statement and some initial levels of understanding on what could be the relevant mechanism to work on that. Something that emerged out of it was the concept like we should be working more on providing product-based training to the commission agents. It also included developing a new incentive structure. These product trainings and incentive structure were part of the intervention in the first few months. Based on that, it also emerged that we should be working on improving the sales pitch of these commission agents as well. While these three interventions, product training, incentive structure, and sales training were in place, we were doing our own round of data collection qualitatively with the members, and it emerged that a lot of the members still don't have like a clear idea of the new incentive structure in place. Based on that feedback, we made a pivot in our intervention. We worked on especially improving the communication part of our incentives with giving a thorough explanation of them during the workshops, as well as introducing an incentive structure which will reward them right at the purchase of profit, not a delayed reward that would come almost like after a month of the purchase if the next workshop happens. This had a tremendous impact, and real buy-in coming from the commission agents. Based on that, we also followed up with another set of workshops where we help them understand that if they strive for achieving higher set of sales target, they can hit the new incentive structure, and in that case their profit margins would considerably change. And we were trying to provide a training on for them to understand how their profit margins can be calculated and how their actual profit would change. All of this exercise led to some substantial changes that we could measure on through LSM's MIS as well as our own data collection. While this channel was contributing to an amount of 34,000 INR per month to the sales of LSM in the starting of the experiment, this number increased to 96,000 at the end of the experiment. Over here, what we have on the slides is a breakdown of like some granular details of what has happened. You can see that the number of Sakhis who were able to achieve the incentive target of 500 or 1,000 increased throughout this period. And also we were able to see an increase in the meal sales done by Sakhi, which almost doubled throughout the experiment, doubled within the experiment. So passing it over to Michael.
Great. Thank you, Siddhant and Siddharth. Just say to everybody that these were just two specific examples of many modules that we are assessing through these methods. And that's also only part of the overall evaluation. We will be sharing with SEWA later lots of the findings in the coming months, which are much more extensive and much broader. Happy to already see some comments on the chat, where I think people coming from the tradition, being used to evaluations that use statistical methods, and this is a different way of bringing rigor into the system. So what I'd like to do now is hear from first Ilabin from SEWA on what it was like to be a participant in this. Ilabin, will you be starting from LSM?
Yeah, thank you, Michael Bhai. Namaste, my name is Ila. I am working with Lok Swasthya Cooperative since last 30 years, and I am the CEO of the cooperative. Just I would like to share experience regarding the Agile Sprint. Agile Sprint approach has been very helpful to achieve the LSM objective, and also contribute to increase the income of local leaders, as Siddharth Bhai said that, through the sale of Ayurvedic products. In past, we work on the problem for some time and left it. But we learned from the Agile experience that if we continuously work on the problem and make necessary changes immediately and monitor it regular basis, we get result. And also we learn from the Imago regarding the importance of the data sharing, and based on data we change in the strategy. There was a change in mindset of the team that along with the health service, sale of Ayurvedic product is possible and necessary. Also, we found that the strengthen and coordination between the service team and the business team through the Agile approach. And also through Agile, we increase the sale of Ayurveda through our Sakhi, through our local leaders, from 5 lakhs to 15 lakhs in a year. Thank you.
The working together with the implementing organization is very important for this kind of evaluation. And we particularly like the way we could work with LSM, where we were giving feedback and they were taking action. And that actually also gives us more confidence technically in that we're assessing causal effects. We should have said Agile, of course, is something we've taken very much used in the tech industry, and we feel that what SEWA has been doing working with us is developing Agile for the grassroots. We're now going to turn to the panelists, and I'd like to invite Bidisha to start.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael, and thank you to the Imago team, also SEWA, for inviting me to this event. And, you know, I'm actually very thrilled to be in part of this panel because I remember can't remember, perhaps at least 3 or 4 years ago, I was in a similar panel on the invitation of SEWA, and where we were talking about evaluation. And one of the discussions at that time, I wonder, Sapna, if you were also in that panel, you know, we tend to be in similar, you know, groups, but is where we talked about, you know, the long history of SEWA and how that can inform the context in which and the interventions that SEWA plans to really be impactful. And so you know, really very happy to see the presentations made by Siddhant and Siddharth, which also focused on that. I have some reflections on the methodology broadly and also to its application to this particular case. The first point that I would like to make is that development, let us be, you know, let us accept the fact that development practice, bringing change and transformation for good in the lives of people necessarily means embracing complexities. And that is something that we should not shy away from. I heard about, and I'm totally sympathetic about the points that were raised about being data heavy, about the many interviews and so on. But I think at some point, if we really want to make a difference, we have to resist the temptation to simplify everything because we don't operate in those environments anymore. SEWA is not only, you know, it's not only functioning as a collective social enterprise. It is also in the market. Markets are complex, you know. Along with that, there is also the broader social objectives. So indeed, these are, you know, systems that need to be looked at very carefully. And we have to really thank the fact that the donors have come forward to fund a study like this, which has broader external value as well. So broadly, just, you know, one simple point that let's not be afraid of complexities. Let's not try to oversimplify things because we don't operate in simple environments anymore. And one of the relevant aspects of the methodology that I particularly like is the attempt to examine, you know, interventions that are within a system. And that system in itself is quite complicated. It's complex. And I read the paper, which also differentiates what is complicated and what is complex, but I'll not get into that. The conundrum with scaling, and here again, you know, we are talking about scaling, is that, you know, the change process is often, you know, has in itself a lot of, in turn, the change process also changes the systems. The system is itself dynamic, and that needs to be taken into consideration. So there's a lot of studies, I think, and I noted one of the questions in the Q&A about context. And so there are a lot of context-specific studies, you know, a lot of study on the context. Where have these studies focused on? They've tried to examine the context of the target population. So we know who are the women who participate in these collectives, what are their backgrounds, and so on. And often they take the form of baselines. But a similar examination is also needed related to the broader institutional and social setup. Because women in collectives, poor women who are entrepreneurial, have to have many interfaces. They interface with governments, they interface with the markets, they interface with competitors, some of whom may be men. And it's important to not only study how they interact with each of these ecosystem actors, but also how they are able to change, influence, or not make any difference at all in the ecosystem. I would, really be excited to see if there is any kind of study that can be built in within this about the power dynamic that exists in this, not only within the collective, but also how the collective, as the collective and the enterprises interact with these broader actors. The second point that I would like to bring up is, of course, about history, SEWA's history. And, the fact that looking institutionally, to look at SEWA itself and what it brings into, what is different about what SEWA brings into the table. Why are SEWA federations or cooperative, why they may be different from, say, others. And that requires perhaps some, larger, comparative study. And Michael, very aware of the work that we've done with the NRLM SAGs and so on. But again, a look more closely into the institution and the organization itself. Okay, then let me just go a bit into the exact example that was shared. And again, really very interesting and I'm really very happy to see the amount of work, the effort that has gone into this. There was a lot of focus, at least the slides that were presented were very much focused on women's income and so on. But we also need to understand what is happening to the collective, to the enterprise broadly. And I think I noted a slide which kind of said that, but it wasn't much elaborated. And also, I think this brings me to support that eventually they are enterprises, and we need to talk about business sustainability. And there has to be a minimum viability. So that lens has also to be brought in. And I was wondering if there's a possibility of integrating all the business information into this and really be able to understand what is happening to the business sustainability part of it. True, we are making profits. It's true we are making more sales. It's true our members have higher income. But are we sustainable as a business? Can we compete in the market? And if we really embrace that push towards making profit, then what are we giving up? What are the trade-offs involved? I would love to see a study on that. I'm curious myself. And then, of course, I also touched a bit about, strengthening the organization, strengthening the institutions, and, strengthening the organizational structure of these federations and of these collectives, because they are the building blocks, they are the foundation. So what is their internal governance structure? How is that playing into the overall impacts that we observe for these businesses? So that, again, something that might be very, very interesting. I would be very interested to know about. I think there was also another point, but I want to make, but I don't want to make it sound like, I'm just, expecting everything, the star and the moon from this evaluation. But perhaps it's also possible to think about, how are we changing norms around gender and women's entrepreneurship with such programs, and how can the evaluation inform this? Because I do believe that norms changing, at least changing the lens at which women's enterprises are viewed, that might actually be one very, very important element in ensuring that the businesses themselves are sustainable and can compete. There are a lot of things involved around women's mobility, labor force participation, and are these interventions really making a difference at that level? Because our experience with NRLM have shown that even though there might be increases in income, there may be more community participation. At the end of the day, women still, are within the household are still not as empowered as we would like to be. So the norms don't really change. And perhaps I'll end by saying that let us not discount the importance of establishing cause and effect in a very numeric way, to get a number and estimate. Not only because that's not only because it's there are methods that can be used in this, and I definitely see the potential of doing that, but also because there's an element of accountability. For what do I get for every dollar every rupee that I put into these enterprises, and what are the impacts? So I do think that that might be an interesting extension or something to think about for if there's a next phase being planned. I will stop at that, and thank you so much again for giving me this chance to share my thoughts. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Bidisha. Especially with all your experience in both quantitative as well as qualitative evaluation. I particularly welcome how you have emphasized understanding the dynamics of the system. And I should say, actually, we've got another 9 months of this. So I love the way you're pushing us both to go into the business, but also we are planning some more qualitative work at the individual member level and in the businesses. And on norms, I think there's both the norms of individual women, but something that Ilaben highlighted that we've engaged with, shifts in mindsets within the businesses themselves. Great, thank you so much. Over to you, Sapna. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Michael, to Imago and to SEWA. And Bidisha, you're absolutely right. This is a bit of a deja vu, I think, from a few years ago discussing, but it's wonderful to see results and early results and insights that we have a chance to comment on. So I really appreciate this opportunity. I'm going to speak about the implications as I see them of the findings, both as somebody who has been inside SEWA, but also very much so as somebody in the field of public health, given LSM's role in particular. So excuse me, I'm not going to focus on the business. I think enough people have talked about that. So I'm going to zoom out for a minute to also think about the evolution and the genesis of LSM and how the evaluation reflects and can continue to reflect. And Michael, to your last point, I take that as an invitation to then also give some suggestions on things to further study in the next 9 months, as I'll sort of pepper that with it. And also as someone who's done a fair amount of sort of implementation research and tried to capture complexity, I really appreciate how difficult this is to constantly negotiate the tension between being useful to the implementer, which is, I argue, the most important thing, and which is what we discussed, I think, in that panel years ago on evaluation, that the most important thing is, well, what will SEWA learn from this? But with that, also to derive some generalizable insights that can help other enterprises and other similar sort of interventions. So at that, I really appreciate and congratulate Imago for pulling this off in what appears to be a really honest and true partnership with SEWA, which I really appreciate, because it's not always the case with evaluators that you can have this clearly open dialogue. So that's wonderful. So starting with that, I'm going to focus more on LSM, just given my own history, but also I think it serves as an interesting example to think about the tension with social enterprise. So LSM's founding, Mirai Ben and I had, I think about 7 or 8 years ago, written a piece on this dual approach, the idea that this has always been about sustainability, but sustainability to improve the health of women, and sustainability in order to really allow community health workers to have an income that allows them to serve. So from that approach, it's really interesting. I mean, LSM came about and it still continues to be one of a kind, at least to my knowledge in India, of an organization, of a cooperative, of what are essentially community health workers. So when we use the word sales agent, I still I have a bit of a reaction, because they are at their heart also community health workers who serve multiple purposes. But of course, from the context of LSM, and I'm sure Ilaben's laughing because we've had this conversation for about 20 years, which is that, you know, at their core, they're still health workers, and a lot of their tasks are not income or incentive based. So, you know, how do we negotiate that tension between, obviously, the sustainability is absolutely critical. Without that, without the improved income, these women will not be able to serve, or nor will LSM as an organization be able to fulfill its mission, which is to improve the health of its members. And actually, for many years, I think the focus was more tilted towards the service side. So it's wonderful to see these results, and also to see that there is this change in mindset, as Ilaben mentioned, in thinking about income and sustainability, because that is difficult. These are women steeped in the values of service and community health, and all of their trainings really have focused on that. So that's wonderful to see. Something we had struggled with in evaluations of LSM's work, actually, from the public health side, well, was that we can't really show health outcomes in the traditional epidemiologic sense either. So we had put forward something, I think, years ago that I revisited today, about what is a framework that can drive evaluation when you think of a place like LSM. And we'd come up with 7 or 8 sort of indicators, which I'm going to read out from a piece we had done years ago, which is, one is organizational sustainability, employment security. And these are the 2 that I see this evaluation really contributing to, that frankly have not been done before in this way. But then also on the health side, to think about health security as a concept as opposed to health outcomes. So think about health security of the entire cooperative, so the organizational level, the member level, the health worker level, but also the woman level in terms of who they're serving. So the awareness around health of women, expenditure on health, health outcomes, but also access to services. And then again, putting SEWA, exactly as Bidisha had said, is situating LSM within SEWA is also its contribution through collective action to things like policy changes, which it has absolutely done. So what I would love to see is some thinking, if possible, and I believe it really is possible, is to take some of these findings, but then also situate them within the larger role of LSM, to think about, well, what is the value also of sustainability and the sort of activities that women are doing that's adding to the sort of broader mission of LSM. And I'll give a very specific example. So do women end up selling more makeup or cosmetics, for example, because there's a higher profit margin, rather than trying to get women to buy, or to think about, not to buy necessarily, but to think about some of the medicines they may need, which may have a lower profit. You know, so questions like that would be interesting to just throw a public health lens and a community health lens and an LSM lens on some of your findings. That may not be your main set of results, but I think speaking to the larger history of LSM, it does deserve that. And it would be interesting to see. And again, I think it'll be instructive in terms of understanding how that balance has been negotiated, because at the end, you know, this organization exists not only to be sustainable for business sake, unlike others perhaps, but it's all, I mean, of course, the income of the women members matters, but alongside that, it's that larger community health function. And I'd be interested to see what changed amongst women. The second sort of area of implications or reflections I'd like to make are on how valuable this study could be for this larger world around community health workers. Again, to situate these women in their sort of core role or their original role. So there's a huge literature in the public health field where I sit on financial and non-financial incentives for community health workers, and that relationship between incentives and motivation. And I believe you've captured some of that. And if that can be framed to speak to that literature, it is such a valuable contribution. Because right now that literature sort of sits at saying, well, financial incentives, no surprise, help with service delivery. But what is that whole family of non-financial incentives and motivation? And right now it sort of talks about training, but LSM has a model that is, again, so unique in terms of internal accountability, collective organizing, the sisterhood, that can really serve to help think about what incentives and motivation mean, because these women are there for the money, of course, but for much more beyond that. So there's some key learnings that I think could speak to that broad literature on health workers and incentives and motivation. I also think the system of internal accountability in particular is one, because it, as Bidisha said, there's an accountability thinking about investments, but there's also an internal accountability structure within LSM that doesn't just talk about that profit part. So again, what are the learnings there that can help? And a very specific example is, we have a nation full of ASHA workers, largely whom are not organized. So there are some organized now attempts to organize and unionize, etc. So what are the key learnings from this sort of work for larger sort of movements of health workers? Because again, there is so much to be learned. And one of the big gaps we've had is that we talk about LSM as a health cooperative, but we don't think of LSM as also a sustainable business enterprise, which it very well may be on the road to being. So I would sort of urge you to think, and I'm sorry, I'm adding more work in a way, but to urge you to think about the implications of this outside of enterprises only, because there's a lot to learn, particularly given that you're seeing some really promising work on terms of improvements with incentives. And then my last sort of set of reflections is around the methods. Like I said earlier, I really appreciate and applaud the fact that you've gone to this very complex method. And one of the things I'm always asked, and I'm sure you are too, is, well, okay, so what for anyone else outside of SEWA, outside of this specific cooperative? Is there anything at all that's generalizable? And at least in the world of public health, we've come a long way from trials and even experimental studies to really focusing on implementation research and using a range of methods to come at many of our questions. And one of the most important factors in that has been identifying the role of context. And that is such a fuzzy word, because it's not context in terms of, where they are and also who they are, but also what are those very specific contextual factors. Some of those are very linked to SEWA, and some of them are absolutely not linked to SEWA. There's a reason why in certain states this may work and in other states it will not, for example, in India. So what is the sort of broader, and I think those are I didn't see that in these slides, and that very well may be there, but I think in your qualitative work, it'd be interesting to think about the context in which this can be effective. One of the big sort of criticisms I've had of work we did, implementation research of the SEWA Shakti Kendra as well, they said, well, this is all about, it's SEWA that did this. How would other sorts of organizations take on some of these learnings? But I do believe there are serious and important learnings that can be, distilled out. But the challenge to you is to identify those and to really think about the contextual factors. I mean, there's a whole literature and realist evaluation and implementation research attempts to get at these. So I'd like to see the application here, because I know you've come a lot from the business world in terms of the thinking and trying to meld that. So really, I mean, this is my last sort of comment is, if I were to sum up in terms of seeing where this can go, I'd love to see the evaluation be situated more in the broader history and goals of LSM, one. Secondly, to think about the learnings from this for the broader world of community health workers, because there's a lot to be learned there. And then lastly, in terms of methods, to think about really how do you distill some of the things that are indeed generalizable to both, I mean, actually to three worlds, to the world of places like SEWA and women's organizations and movements with women, led by women. Secondly, for enterprises, social enterprises. And third, for the field of public health in general. So at that, I'll stop. I'm sorry, I think I've just thrown a lot more challenges at you, but I really appreciated this and look forward to seeing the next round of results.
Great. Thank you, Sapna. I'm again very happy we've got a good another 9 months working on this project, but I would particularly recognize your emphasis on these how to understand the tensions within the co-op and for the women themselves, between financial incentives, empowerment, between community health work and delivering services. And you're going to help us on this, on how we take some of this forward, especially on the communication with the whole health literature. I'm going to pass to Michael, but just want to highlight one comment that's come in from Paramita in the chat, who we've been working with. She raised the point, is this approach, when we can do it, better when we can do it prospectively, as it working in real time, as we did in the case of LSM. And I think, yes, I would strongly reinforce that. That's the way we love to work, both because we're actually helping in real time. Yes, as Shweta Ben said, we've got to understand mutual languages, but also methodologically, we're more confident on the assessment of causality. But with that, I'm going to pass to Michael. Welcome.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks to everybody for including me in your conversation today. It's I had the pleasure of meeting Ella Barth 20 years ago at a conference at the World Bank. So I had that sort of connection, at least for over a longer period of time. But I've always been super interested in what you've done, and I'm delighted that Imago has partnered with you to try and embrace the complexity, as someone said earlier, rather than not just try and simplify everything, but sort of, well, I guess simultaneously simplify what everyone thinks is complicated and complicate what everyone thinks is simple. And I think if you can get that tension right, then that's the essence of doing really good evaluation work, because anything you're doing really is inherently complicated and complex. But social science has tools for dealing with these things, and it's great to see that the richer portfolio of options available to people is being explored here. One of the paradoxes, I think, of being in elite universities and teaching with elite professors is they all do elite research. And so if you go to the American Evaluation Association meetings, for example, RCTs are just one small slice of a whole array of different things that people are doing, from assessing the effects of the income tax credits right through to climate change, right through to community interventions of one kind or another. So there is a rich array of tools out there for dealing with these kind of questions, but unfortunately we aren't willing or able to incorporate that. And this is a nice example of that, of being able to incorporate this larger array. That particular kind of strategy that we've been introduced to here, process tracing and its companion contribution analysis, and the broader array of process evaluation tools, this is a really quite unique application that you've seen today. Most of the work historically that uses process tracing was done by comparative political scientists who were working in these very meta categories of development, democracy, international relations, diplomacy, all these very big categories. And you couldn't crunch all of that into neat regression models of any kind. So they came up with these tools for addressing these things. But it's only really over the last decade or so that there's been a call to try and microize a lot of that logic down to these more tangible, but still much, in some sense, much more real ways in which these different configurations of people, context, imperatives, and then unobserved factors in a statistical sense start to really show themselves as being really central to what we need to understand. But as Shweta mentioned earlier on, though, this inherent antecedent work that needs to be done with all of this to set out the pedagogy and to explain this to people. And and even when it's the chattering classes like us talking about this, you need that antecedent, let alone when you're trying to explain this to illiterate people who don't function in the same sort of analytic worlds that we are paid to function in. So I guess that's why this meeting itself has been held, is just to really help us all get more familiar with this. Even if once you do get it, you get it. Like, the intuition actually is there all the time. But it's just hard to get your world into a structure that can start to really unpack a lot of these things and then try and reassemble them back together again. And central to all that is this thing we call the theory of change, which it sounds very academic and is sort of the concept that you have to have because it's sort of the analytic structure that holds all this together. But it's another thing we have to be much more confident about embracing, because everything has a theory of change. This meeting is being held on a theory of change, that getting 50 or 60 people together on a Zoom connection ultimately leads to us having higher levels of learning and understanding and appreciation, and that in turn leads There's a theory of change everywhere, and just trying to turn what is implicit and what is assumed into something explicit and something that can be simultaneously deconstructed and reconstructed to help us think, and will help decision makers think, and help participants think more strategically in one sense, but ultimately trying to help each other engage in this business of claiming and counterclaiming in sensible ways, and ways that doesn't just lead to people trying to claim that their head's pointier than someone else's and so they should be listened to, or that they yell louder than someone else. It's like trying to provide a systemic basis on which these conversations can move forward. And that's what you've seen today is just examples of how you can try and take the inherent complexity and not be intimidated by it, just see the key parameters that are the key scope conditions around which these factors are playing out, and then start to use more probabilistic claimings around the likelihood that this is true, or the less likelihood that is true. And again, that's intuitive. We make decisions every day about that has that kind of probabilistic logic built into it. We just don't talk that way about it. It's so intuitive to what we do that it's only when someone puts a label on it that we suddenly freak out or think that this is weird, but it's actually normal. And really, that's much of what this work is doing, but it's not normal in a world in which it just it's not even on the agenda. It's not how students are taught. It's not how not how the senior people engaging with other senior people talk about, because they don't see a lot of this kind of stuff. So I think we need a lot more of this engagement around the theory of change, because that is everything. That holds everything together. And by being able to unpack that and look at it more formally, you start to be able to engage in these questions of claiming and counterclaiming in real time in ways that does actually really promote real-time learning. And that's ultimately the real purpose of this is not to show that something works with a capital W and therefore we've demonstrated rigorously that it works and therefore it should work everywhere. Good science is all about scope conditions. It's always saying how far, what are the parameters within which this thing works, and what is it that makes it work? What are these black box things that we all talk about that actually drive what we're doing, and being able to do that systematically, but in ways that isn't about compliance. It isn't about trying to help people be accountable, even in some narrow sense. It's about really trying to work within the systems that you're in to try and make the learning process truly learning, and trying to enable it to build out the capability for implementation. That's really the fundamental task that's being engaged with here. So I guess I'm in with my sort of pointy-headed hat on. I think it's really important that this kind of work is brought to attention of other pointy-headed people, because it's actually quite innovative. This microizing and developmentizing a process tracing tool is very rare. It's not actually done that way. You have plenty of macro first world big discussions. That's where it all came from. But it's been something that has slowly started to trickle down and then trickle out. And these kinds of experiences with how you can do it in very fluid and very diverse contexts and still promote learning becomes really useful to a whole bunch of other people. And that leads me ultimately to my final point around this, as someone else mentioned earlier, just about the big imperative that we all face around this stuff, which is scaling and replicating. And geez, we've been seduced by so much of that language over the last year about all of this what works conferences that are held with this deep belief that somehow it's our job as development professionals to tell people what works with a capital W in both instances. And what we can teach, what we hope we can do is to how can we learn systematically about how to respond to a well-articulated problem with a reasoned, defensible solution, and learn in real time how to get a better marriage between those two things, given this wonderful word called context, which is just replete in multiple ways with things that are so many times just not observable until you render them legible, until you make them be able to be seen. And this kind of work enables you to do precisely that, to see, or at least to test out claims and counterclaims being made about the ways in which, or the conditions under which, these particular outcomes are being generated. So more of it, basically, and keep taking this stuff on the road, keep bringing people, excuse me, into these conversations so that it starts to become the new normal for thinking about these things, and rather than this exotica off to the side, or this stuff you do when you can't run an RCT or something. No, just this is a very normal slice of a vast array of ways in which we engage with complexity and with contested questions, and not be intimidated by that, but rather see that there in fact are tools for dealing with this work. And where we ourselves are trying to learn how to do this work better and more systematically, but more compellingly, so that people, whether it's the top of our food chains and authorization structures, allow us to keep doing that, but ultimately, as in the spirit of both Imago and SEWA, really trying to build out this work that makes it tangible and actionable for those people that are most affected by it and who are both in the delivery side and the recipient side. And that's when it becomes magic. That's when it really does its work, because you're optimizing the time and the resourcing and the energy and the commitments of those that are most affected by it. So keep doing it. I hope to be look forward to keeping up to speed on what you find over the next 9 months and the next 9 years. I mean, this is ongoing work. So thanks very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Michael, also of articulating that we're in a kind of bridge between real frontline practice, but also a set of academic type traditions around methodology. And what I love about this discussion here is the sense that in the kind of space that we've created here, there's both a tremendous recognition that we are kind of bravely trying to tackle some of the really tough problems around complexity, system, tensions, and that we are not designing the questions we focus based on methodology we like, but we're building those from the problems we're tackling. And I'd also like to I think a theme that all of you have said is that in our work, as we built our methodological base, we were very much drawing on different traditions. As Michael said, some of the specific traditions in process tracing is mainly done in completely other areas. And we found that as one part of the toolkit, that could be adapted to these more micro-specific areas. And also we're continuing to work on a lot of the questions of systems diagnostic organizational histories that you have all emphasized. I know we're almost out of time. I'd just like to say some of the things that we are planning over the next several months, which are definitely being enriched and somewhat adapted, given the reactions, the suggestions we've especially got from Bidisha and Sapna. Yes, we are going to be, there is this work that continues on specific modules. There is work on understanding the collective enterprises as enterprises, the synthetic analysis. And I like the way, I think, especially Sapna pushed to not just as businesses, absolutely as businesses, in the context of understanding they're living in a good tension between social goals, SEWA's history, and becoming businesses. We will also be looking at the two Wests as organizations. And this is actually relevant to what both Bidisha and Sapna highlighted, which is generalizability. We're actually thinking very hard now about what can be scaled and generalized from this experience. And I would flag the way we think in the dynamics is you draw lessons, then you take it to a new context, that word again, but then you work in that context very systematically, and it's a new exploration. But applying the lessons from this, and we're going to go back to the members and doing a mix of actually a quantitative survey. The ID Insight runs that with us, but we're going to do a lot more qualitative work in this phase. So this, I think, that's what we're going to come back to all of you on the methodology, on ideas and specifics on that.